Right now, as you watch this, your savings are losing value. Not because you spent anything, not because you made a mistake. Simply because inflation exists and your money is not keeping up. At 3% inflation, $10,000 today has the purchasing power of about $7,440 in 10 years. You did not touch it. It still shrank. That is what makes inflation so dangerous. It steals quietly, slowly, and without asking for your permission. Most people think of inflation as a news event, a crisis headline, something dramatic that spikes, scares everyone, and eventually fades away. But inflation is not just a headline. It is a permanent background process. Prices rise over time, currency buys less over time, and the people who often get hurt most are not reckless spenders. They are careful savers who do the responsible thing. That is what feels so unfair about this topic. You can avoid debt, skip over spending, save consistently, and still lose purchasing power if your money is sitting in the wrong place. Doing the responsible thing and still falling behind sounds almost absurd. It does not care whether you behaved well. It only cares whether your money is growing faster than prices. So before we talk about strategies, understand the mechanism clearly. Hey, I'm Kira. By the end of this video, you will understand what inflation actually is, why it quietly destroys savings, how real return works, and what to do about it without panic, hype, or internet nonsense. Just the mechanism, the math, and the strategies that actually matter. Inflation is the rate at which the general level of prices rises over time. If inflation is 5%, then the same basket of groceries that costs $100 today costs about $105 next year. Your money buys less. That is the entire mechanism. Inflation does not always feel dramatic because it often arrives as a series of small increases. A little more for food, a little more for rent, a little more for insurance, a little more for everything. Small enough to ignore in the moment, large enough to change your future. Where does inflation come from? Usually from some combination of three forces. First, more money chasing the same amount of goods. Second, supply shocks, where production or delivery gets disrupted and prices rise because things become harder to get. Third, demand surges, where lots of people rush to buy at once and sellers raise prices because they can. Inflation is not one villain. It is a system-level pressure that can come from multiple directions at the same time. The Federal Reserve targets roughly 2% inflation over time. Not zero. Because zero inflation sounds nice until you understand the alternative. If prices start falling broadly, consumers delay spending, companies earn less, hiring weakens, and the economy can seize up. So 2% is treated like a controlled burn. Manageable, intentional. The problem is that inflation does not always stay controlled. When it rises while your savings stay flat, your purchasing power starts quietly bleeding out. This is the formula that matters. Real return equals your return minus inflation. If your savings account pays 0.5% and inflation is 4%, your real return is negative 3.5%. In other words, your account balance may look stable, but your buying power is shrinking every year. That is the illusion cash creates. The number in the account stays still enough to feel safe. The value behind the number is quietly being eaten away. So how do you protect yourself? Option 1 is equities, especially broad index funds. Over long periods, stocks have historically outpaced inflation by a meaningful margin. That does not mean they are stable every month. They are not. But on a long enough timeline, productive businesses tend to grow faster than the prices around them. That is why equities remain the primary inflation hedge for long-term wealth. Not because they are exciting, because they work. This is where many people get confused. They think inflation protection should feel safe in the short term. but the strongest inflation protection is often volatile in the short term and powerful in the long term. Index funds are boring, scalable, liquid, diversified, and historically effective. That combination is hard to beat. People search for exotic inflation hedges because boring answers feel emotionally unsatisfying. Financial reality does not care what feels cinematic. It rewards what compounds. Option 2 is I-bonds. These are U.S. savings bonds where the yield is tied directly to inflation. When inflation rises, the rate adjusts upward. When inflation falls, the rate comes down. They are not glamorous, and they will not make anyone feel like a genius at a dinner party. During periods of elevated inflation, they can be genuinely useful. They are especially relevant for cash you want to protect without taking equity-level risk. Option 3 is TIPS, Treasury Inflation Protected Securities. Similar idea, different structure. Instead of paying a rate directly tied in the same way as I-bonds, the principal value adjusts with inflation. That makes TIPS another tool for preserving purchasing power, especially for larger portfolios or more sophisticated allocation strategies. They are not the first product most beginners need, but they are worth understanding because they solve a very specific problem well. Option 4 is real assets, real estate, certain commodities, productive assets tied to real economic activity. These can help over long periods because they tend to move with inflation or benefit from rising prices indirectly. But they are not always accessible, simple, or liquid, especially for beginners. Everyone should start here category. Inflation protection should be practical, not theoretical. Now let's clear out 2 common myths. Crypto is not a reliable inflation hedge. It is too volatile and too behaviorally unstable. Gold is not useless, but it is also not the magical answer the internet likes to pretend it is. Over long periods, equities have generally been the stronger wealth-building inflation hedge. Gold can store value in certain environments. Crypto can surge for many reasons, but neither should be treated as your primary inflation defense if your goal is long-term financial stability. The first common mistake is holding far more cash than you actually need. An emergency fund in a high-yield savings account makes sense. Large amounts of extra cash sitting in checking for years do not. The second mistake is reacting emotionally to inflation headlines and panic buying whatever asset happens to be trending. The third is forgetting inflation in retirement planning. If you think $50,000 a year will cover retirement decades from now, inflation may quietly double the lifestyle cost you need to replace. This is where containers matter again. If your cash must stay liquid, at least make sure it sits in a high-yield savings account instead of a near-zero account out of habit. Even a difference of a few percentage points changes the outcome materially over time. Same money, same person, different container, different future. Sometimes the smartest financial move is not changing your behavior at all. It is simply moving your money into a structure that stops punishing it. So here is your move this week. Check the savings rate at your current bank. Then compare it with strong high-yield savings accounts. If the gap is more than 2%, move your emergency fund. That one quiet decision can be worth hundreds or even over $1,000 over time with almost no extra effort. Inflation erodes purchasing power every single year. Real return is return minus inflation. Your primary hedge is equities and broad index funds. Secondary tools include I-bonds, TIPS, and high-yield savings for cash you need to keep safe. Ignore hype, respect math, protect purchasing power on purpose. Subscribe if this helped, and I'll see you in the next video.